Please start, Alka.
Namaskar to all of you. On behalf of Vivekananda Study Circle JNU, we welcome our speakers, delegates, and dear friends to this webinar on Swami Vivekananda's Birth Anniversary Lecture Series 2021. So in today's session, we have revered Swami Tyagananda ji among us, who will speak on renunciation and service in the first three ashramas of life. We start today's program as usual with the recital of Vedic chanting from Taittiriya Upanishad, a part of Yajurveda. I request Prachi to begin the program with the recital of the mantra. Prachi ji, over to you.
Thank you, Alka. Sahana bhavatu sahanam bhunaktu sahaviryam karvavahai तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः Om. May we, teacher and student, be protected. May we both be nourished. May we work together with great energy. May our intellect be sharpened. May our study be effective. Let there be no animosity amongst the teacher and the taught. Om. Peace in me, peace in nature, peace in divine forces.
Thank you, Prachi ji. So, a brief introduction about VSC, those who are not familiar with this. The Vivekananda Study Circle of Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU, New Delhi was formed on 1st of November 2014 to study the teachings of Swami Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna, and Sri Sharada Devi with the aim of molding our lives based on the Vedantic truth of oneness. VSC JNU is a non-political, non-religious, non-profit, independent organization run by faculty members, students, and alumni of JNU. We usually meet every Saturday to study the scriptures and the work of Swami Vivekananda and practice chanting and meditation. We also hold public talks and retreat programs. So we are commemorating Swamiji's birth anniversary with a special lecture series. So we welcome today everyone to the last talk in this series. So we have two wonderful kids among us, Arghya and Ahan. So I would request both of them to sing a devotional song for us. Arghya, Ahan, over to you.
नमस्कार नमस्कार মা এসেছে মোদের কি আর ভাবনা ভাই মা এসেছে মোদের কি আর ভাবনা ভাই বাবের বোঝা দূরে ফেলে আইসা কোলে নাচি গায় বাবের বোঝা দূরে ফেলে আইসা কোলে নাচি গায় মা এসেছে মোদের কি আর ভাবনা ভাই মা এসেছে মোদের কি আর ভাবনা ভাই মাঝে জগৎ তারিণী ভব ভয় হারিণী মাঝে জগৎ তারিণী ভব ভয় হারিণী ধর্ম অর্থ কাম মোক্ষ সর্বদায়িনী ধর্ম অর্থ কাম মোক্ষ সর্বদায়িনী আবার না চাহিতে সকলে সন্তানের মন ভোলায় না চাহিতে সকলে সন্তানের মন ভোলায় মা এসেছে মোদের কি আর ভাবনা ভাই মোদের কি আর ভাবনা ভাই বাপের বোঝা দূরে ফেলে আই সকলে নাচিবার বাপের বোঝা দূরে ফেলে আই সকলে নাচিবার মা এসেছে মোদের কি আর ভাবনা ভাই মা এসেছে মোদের কি আর ভাবনা ভাই ওরে কে আছিস কোথায় সবে আইরে ছুটে আয় ওরে কে আছিস কোথায় সবাই আইরে ছুটে আয় এমন ছুটিন রে ভাই হারাস হারায় এমন ছুটিন রে ভাই হারাস হেরায় একবার জয় মা বলে দাঁড়া রে তুই একটি ঢুকে ভাঙবি নাই জয় মা বলে দাঁড়া রে তুই একটি ঢুকে ভাঙবি নাই মা এসেছে মোদের কি আর ভাবনা ভাই মা এসেছে মোদের কি আর ভাবনা ভাই বাপের বোঝা দূরে ফেলে আর সকলে নাচিবার বাপের বোঝা দূরে ফেলে আর সকলে নাচিবার মা এসেছে মোদের কি আর ভাবনা ভাই মা এসেছে মোদের কি আর ভাবনা ভাই মা এসেছে মোদের কি আর ভাবনা ভাই ধন্যবাদ
Alka, your mic.
I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, Orga Arun. You presented it so wonderfully. So now I invite Divya to welcome the speaker, introduce the theme, and conduct the talk and discussion. So before handing it over to Divya, there are some instructions and guidelines for the audience. Kindly switch off your video camera and microphone during the webinar session. This is especially for the people who are attending us via Google Meet. And to all the audience, they can write their questions during the session in the chat box. Live questions will be taken up after the speaker or panelists have finished speaking. If you would like to be included in the mailing list or would like to share your valuable suggestions or feedback, or you want to join us in our regular classes and wish to receive notifications, may please email us to vscjnu@gmail.com. We would be very happy to have you there. Thank you. Over to you, Divya, now.
Thank you, Alka. It is my privilege to welcome Swami Tyagananda ji to the VSC JNU session today. Swami Tyagananda joined the Ramakrishna monastic order in Mumbai in 1976 after graduating from the University of Mumbai. Besides Mumbai, he served in monasteries at Belur Mutt, New Delhi, and Chennai, and was sent to Boston in 1998 to assist Swami Sarvagatananda. After Sarvagatananda ji's retirement in 2002, Tyagananda was appointed head of the Vedanta Society in Boston. Swami Tyagananda was the editor of the English journal Vedanta Kesari for 11 years and has written, translated, and edited 12 books. His notable books are Interpreting Ramakrishna, Kali's Child Revisited, co-authored with Pravrajika Vrajaprana, 2010, Walking the Walk, A Manual of Karma Yoga, 2014, and Knowing the Knower, A Manual of Jnana Yoga, 2017. He has presented papers at academic conferences, and he gives lectures and classes at the Vedanta Society, as well as MIT, Harvard, and other colleges and religious groups in North America. He is the Hindu chaplain at Harvard University and MIT since 1999. I'll preface Swamiji's talk today with a few opening comments introducing the theme of the talk, which is renunciation and service in the three ashramas of life. In his lectures from Colombo to Almora, Swami Vivekananda said, "Neither through wealth nor through progeny, but by giving up alone, that immortality is to be reached." Even King Janaka himself had to renounce. Who was a greater renouncer than he? But in modern times, we all want to be called Janakas. They are all Janakas of children, unclad, ill-fed, miserable children. The word Janaka can be applied to them in the sense only. They have none of the shining godlike thoughts as the old Janaka had. These are our modern Janakas. A little less of this Janakism now, and come straight to the mark. If you can give up, you will have religion. If you cannot, you may read all the books that are in the world from east to west, swallow all the libraries, and become the greatest pundits. But if you have karma kanda only, you are nothing. There is no spirituality. Through renunciation alone, this immortality is to be reached. As the breadwinner of society, the householder is integral to the life of the nation, as necessary to its progress as the worker and the ascetic. However, what does it mean to give up? And what is to be given up by householders? Most importantly, what is service? And what does it mean to perform it in the spirit of renunciation? Speaking of his householder devotees, Sri Ramakrishna once said, quote, "I ask people to renounce mentally. I do not ask them to give up the world. If one lives unattached and seeks God with sincerity, then one is able to attain him." Echoing Thakur, Swamiji himself said that the nation itself cannot flourish in strength of character and creative power without the householder's renunciation of attachment to the sense of me and mine, and I suppose all of us, which causes us to identify with the finite body and mind rather than the immortal soul. It also seems that the idea of service, as Swamiji envisioned it, is not exactly charity, for this suggests that charity alone will cure the ills of character. But what of poverty of spirit? Both a rich man and a poor man can be held in bondage by attachment to the senses, to name, fame, pleasure, and the prospect of material gain. Hospitals and schools are certainly necessary to heal and educate, but in the end, can a doctor free your soul? Though they are wonderful, can books alone reveal the truth to a child? Utilitarian standards, as Swamiji said, cannot explain the ethical relations of men, for in the first place, we cannot derive any ethical laws from considerations of utility. Religion then emerges out of this struggle of all humanity to free itself from its bondage to nature, the sense that we are greater than the life of this body, of which we are constantly struggling to break free. And for a religion to be true, Swamiji said, it must explain the real nature of this struggle to every human being, regardless of his or her station in life. But the first step to making any kind of progress, as the Gita also reminds us, is giving up. To invoke Swamiji's spirit once more, quote, "Renunciation is the flag, the banner of India, floating over the world, the one undying thought which India says again and again as a warning to dying races, as warning to all tyranny, as warning to wickedness in the world, excuse me." And with that, I would like to welcome you, Swamiji, to give your discourse. Thank you.
Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayethi Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the divine consciousness fill our hearts protect us. So I'm very happy and grateful to the Vivekananda Study Circle at JNU for inviting me and giving me a chance to meet all of you. This is the first time I've never been to JNU myself, although I was in Delhi for a year and a half in 82, 83. And then, of course, I visited Delhi a number of times. Never had a chance to see the campus, but at least I can see at least virtually many of you who are attached to JNU in one way or the other. The topic, renunciation and service, and then the Swamiji's quote that is present on the flyer, that the national ideals of India are renunciation and service. Intensify her in those channels, and the rest will take care of itself. So I would like to just very briefly refer to some of the key terms that come not only in this quote by Swamiji, but also about what does it mean? What are the national ideals? I believe that the earlier lectures on this series focused on patriotism. And so one of the questions we can ask ourselves is, what does it mean to be a patriotic Indian? If I'm a patriot, then it would seem obvious that the national ideals would somehow manifest in my life in one way or the other. Only if renunciation and service in some form become living realities in my own life, can I then say I'm a real Indian? So in order to be an Indian, it's not enough to be simply be born in India or be part of a Indian family or to carry an Indian passport. I mean, still, the world might still recognize us as Indians if we fulfill any of these conditions. But a real Indian, a true Indian, a patriotic Indian would be one in whose life these primary national ideals are manifest: renunciation and service. And we know the equivalent words in Sanskrit, which are probably more than simply equivalent words. I think the Sanskrit terms, I think, carry a greater depth of meaning than renunciation and service in many ways. And so Tyaga and Seva, not only in Sanskrit, in many of our Indian languages, we have this word Tyaga and Seva. Now, these are the essential ingredients of our life. Although the title says it's about the three ashramas, it's essentially about our life itself. I'd like to say a few words about the ashrama itself. We know that traditionally we speak about the 4 stages of life, beginning with the Brahmacharya ashrama, the Grahastha ashrama, the Vanaprastha ashrama, and the Sannyasa ashrama. And sometimes these are equated with some specific periods in life. And some of the books will also mention about like how many years is the Brahmacharya ashrama and how many years and so on. Now, all of that thing may have some validity, but it's also important to recognize that the terms themselves, the Brahmacharya ashrama, the first stage of life, is often equated with the student period in our life. But it's more than simply being a student. So just like we can ask the question, who is a true Indian? We can also ask the question, who is the true student? The first ashrama was called a Brahmacharya ashrama. It wasn't called a Vidyarthi ashrama. And so what is Brahmacharya? Brahman is the infinite one, the ideal of infinitude. Anything that limits us is something that brings us pain and suffering in life. And Brahmani eva charati, that means the more my vision encompasses the entirety of existence, the more limited or narrow-minded I become, I'm not being a brahmachari. So the first part of life is really the training to expand our vision, to not exclude anybody or anything. The word that we often used for students is vidyarthi. Now, again, even if you go to the original word vidyarthi, vidya plus arthi. Arthi means one who wants. Arthi is chahane wala. So vidyarthi is vidya ko chahane wala. So one who seeks knowledge is a vidyarthi. So it's not enough to be enrolled in some school or college to be considered a vidyarthi. So we have to ask ourselves. Now, many of us here, many of you maybe are already presently studying in a school or have just graduated or are in a workplace, but all of us have been students at some stage of life. And so we have to ask ourselves that in that stage of life, was I seeking knowledge, or the primary motive for me to go to college or school was to get a degree? Well, if my primary motive was degree, because a degree is often found essential to enter into the workforce, to build a career. So if I go to school to get a degree, then I'm not really a vidyarthi in a primary sense of the term. Then it would be probably, we might say I'm a degree-arthi. So even to be a vidyarthi means, yes, of course, the degrees will come, recognition will come, rewards will come, all of those things will come. But if I'm to be a true vidyarthi, a true student, then I must be seeking knowledge. And so therefore the first stage in life is really, I said it's not called Vidyarthi Ashrama, it's called a Brahmacharya Ashrama, because it's a time to expand our vision, to not narrow it down among narrow walls and boundaries. Then, of course, is the Grihastha Ashrama. When we start a family, additional responsibilities come to us. The third stage, often called the Vanaprastha Ashrama, is like going to a forest. Now, it's not necessary. Now, a lot of people go for hikes in forests and woodland. Now, they don't become Vanaprasthi just because you go for a hike and stay for a few days in a forest. So obviously, and it might seem as if, well, how many of us go to a forest? But the third stage represents a form of retirement from active life. When the children have grown up and they take up their responsibilities, carry on the family traditions, and then the parents who have reached a stage when they can withdraw. Now, withdraw, as Sri Ramakrishna said, it's important for us to retire now and then into solitude. In Bengali, it's beautiful alliteration. We use the word mone, bone, kone. In other words, retire if you can into some wooded area, if it's near your place, or retire deep inside your mind, or retire into some corner of your home. In other words, find some solitude where it'll be easier to settle the mind down and bring greater clarity in our thinking, in our perception, and so on. So that stage of life in which we have more leisure and more time to do it after we have carried out our responsibilities in life, that's the third stage. So again, you don't have to go to a forest, but a kind of a retired stage when we have mostly retired from our active life and are then contemplating and learning from our experiences in life. That would be the third stage. And although the title does speak about only the first three ashramas, I cannot resist speaking about the fourth ashrama as well, and that is the Sannyasa ashrama. Now again, just like the Vanaprastha, it's not necessary for us to go to a forest to be a Vanaprasthi. We don't necessarily have all to take sannyas in order to enter the fourth ashrama. Sannyasa is primarily a state of mind. And if we have carried out all our duties throughout life in a spirit of dharma, following truthfulness, honesty, unselfishness, then we would have acquired enough clarity of mind, and purity of heart to that ultimate stage of life when we can withdraw completely and give ourselves to the highest ideal, and which Sri Ramakrishna called it God realization. We could say self realization, just call it by any name. But once we have the freedom to direct our entire resources to that highest ideal, and then that would be that final stage. Again, it's not necessary to take formal monastic vows to do that. We will see that in every stage of life, there is not only the necessity, but also plenty of opportunity to practice Tyaga and Seva through all of these four stages. And these are not necessarily like clear demarcations in life. Sometimes these stages overlap. Sometimes one may go from one stage and kind of skip the middle one. All of these different permutations and combinations are possible. We are familiar, Holy Mother was once asked, Sharda Devi. So Mother was once asked, which is the most important teaching in Sri Ramakrishna's life? Now, we know that among the many things Thakur Sri Ramakrishna is known for, one of the first things that comes to mind is clearly the harmony of religions, that he practiced many different religions and confirmed the ancient wisdom that all religions lead to the same goal. And that's like the most dramatic and most unusual. We don't really find that many saints and incarnations practicing different religions. But Sri Ramakrishna came in a time when there was already tremendous diversity, and he reconfirmed that truth for us. So it would seem that the very first thing that can come to mind when we think about Sri Ramakrishna is practice of different religions and an affirmation that all religions are equally true and equally effective in taking us to that ultimate goal. But when Holy Mother was asked that question, which is the most important teaching of Sri Ramakrishna, Mother said, it's Tyaga, it's renunciation. She said that renunciation is Sri Ramakrishna's special message to this world. That alone was his splendor. It's amazing that the very first thing that Mother mentions about Ramakrishna is Tyaga, renunciation, that letting go. Sri Ramakrishna himself said, and these are his words, he said, who can have spiritual awakening? Only the person who has renounced the attachment to worldly things. Only by renunciation is ignorance destroyed. There's a lot. I mean, we can keep on quoting about the things that Sri Ramakrishna Swamiji and Mother have said about renunciation on other great teachers from other traditions as well. As Swamiji is saying is, he said, without renunciation, there cannot be any spiritual growth. In all our yogas, this renunciation is necessary. This is the stepping stone and the real center and the real heart of all spiritual culture, renunciation. This is renunciation. This is religion, renunciation. How can great spirituality come without renunciation? So again, if we see ourselves as spiritual seekers, then we need to look in our hearts and ask, what role does renunciation play in my life? In what ways and in how many ways am I practicing renunciation, consciously or unconsciously? And in order to know, in order to figure out, because renunciation and service, they are interconnected. I cannot serve unless there is some amount of tyaga in me. And I think it might be helpful to reflect a little bit on each of these two ideals, renunciation and service. And I think a good way to go forward might be to just point out some of the misconceptions that we all have regarding these two ideals, Tyaga and Seva. So one of the most common misconception people have about renunciation is it is for sannyasins. It's not for everyone. And I think there might be something into the word renunciation itself and the association of that word with sannyasa. But there's nothing, I mean, the word tyaga can be really translated in many different ways. I mean, I have found in general, you can just see the power of words. Renunciation just seems a little bit frightening to many people that I have seen. On the other hand, if you say letting go, now letting go seems okay. Yeah, sure. We all should try to let go, but it's not really anything different. Renunciation and letting go are not very different things. Um, and then, of course, the word tyaga, because it's also part of my name. I've had a chance to reflect over it more. It's more personal in some ways. Um, so renunciation is for everybody. Sri Ramakrishna once used two terms, and he said there's a Gupta yogi and Vyakta yogi. Yogis who are Gupta, hidden, and Vyakta, yogis who are very visible. So if we want to succeed in spiritual life, if our life has to have greater depth than merely just being just a superficial life. Now, by superficial life, I don't necessarily mean a worldly life. A lot of us, I think I would believe that most of us are good people. So spirituality doesn't mean simply being good. Of course, I mean, it involves being good, but it's more than simply being good. Spiritual life often gets reduced to merely ethical life or moral life. And sometimes we kind of oversimplify religion and spirituality by saying, why read all these scriptures? Why do all this? Just be good and do good, be honest, and that's it. Now, that's probably not it, because there is this one passage that comes in the Kathopanishad when Nachiketa asks Yama, he says, tell me that truth which is beyond dharma and beyond adharma. The truth being beyond adharma, we can understand. But he said the truth is even beyond dharma. It's beyond even the idea of good and bad. So one thing we have to be clear about, that in order to be truthful and honest and moral, one doesn't necessarily have to be religious. It's possible to be a moral person without being a religious person. Sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that if someone is an atheist or an agnostic, then that person must be, not good character, not very moral person. That's not true. It's possible to not have any belief in God, any belief in any religion, and yet be very truthful and honest and moral. And I'm not saying every atheist is moral, but I'm saying it's possible to be moral without being religious. But if I want to be religious, if I want to be spiritual, then one cannot say, well, I'm not moral, but I'm very religious. It doesn't work that way. And that would be hypocrisy. So if I want to be moral, I can be moral even if I'm not religious. But if I'm religious, or if I see myself as religious and spiritual, then I have to be moral. So the edifice of spirituality can be built on a strong foundation of morality. So we have to be moral in order to be spiritual. Another important requirement for spirituality is there has to be the spirit of tyaga, of letting go of the non-essentials so that we can get the essentials. So Sri Ramakrishna said that if you want to be spiritual, what is common, whether someone is a sannyasin or not, whether someone is in the fourth ashrama or in the first three ashramas. If we are spiritual, irrespective of which ashrama we belong to, we have to have this inner spirit of renunciation, of letting go of everything that is false, everything that is negative, everything that is weakening. Inwardly, everyone has to do it. Now, outwardly, all don't have to. If someone is in these first three ashramas, clearly they don't have the duties of a monastic life. So externally, a few people might take these monastic vows, embrace sannyasa ashrama, get a new name, wear new robes, and have a different set of duties and responsibilities. But what is common, whether a person is in the first three ashramas or in the last ashrama, is that inner spirit of detachment, inner spirit, because that is common. You might remember one of the things when M. Mahendranath Gupta, the recorder of the Gospel of Ramakrishna, when he first, during his early visits to Sri Ramakrishna at Dakshineshwar, we see he mentions it comes right in the beginning of the book, the Ramakrishna Kathamrita, the Gospel of Ramakrishna, how he says his ego was crushed by Sri Ramakrishna. And there's always this a little bit of a complex he had that he could not be a sannyasin. And that somehow in our country, in India, the ideal, the monastic ideal is elevated to such a high level that those who have not embraced monasticism, many of us who have not embraced monasticism may feel that I'm somehow falling short of that highest ideal. There's some kind of a complex does get arise in many people, and that's something like that may have happened in M's case. And so he once goes to Sri Ramakrishna and asks him that what is it that determines who will embrace the fourth ashrama and who will remain in the one of the first three ashramas. And one would have thought that Sri Ramakrishna would say that that there's a greater renunciation, one would take that final last step. But if we have not acquired that intensity of renunciation, then we probably won't go there. But that's not what Sri Ramakrishna said. And what he said was, that's the will of the Divine Mother. So who actually embraces the fourth ashrama and who doesn't is not necessarily a measure of how much renunciation a person has. It's possible to have immense renunciation, and yet it may not be the will of the divine that I take that path. And so that is something very important. I think I will very briefly mention an incident that I find very moving every time I think about it or speak about it. And this is an incident in Swami Akhandananda's life. He was one of the great disciples of Ramakrishna. So after Sri Ramakrishna Mahasamadhi, and some of you probably know this incident already, after Ramakrishna Mahasamadhi, when his first batch of disciples that gathered in that dilapidated monastery in Baranagar, this Akhandananda, his pre-monastic name was Gangadhar, he had this kind of a wanderlust. He had this desire to just kind of go by himself, all alone, wandering deep into the Himalayas. And I think among all the disciples, he's the one who really had spent a much longer time in wandering in distant places, even places where none of the other disciples went. He went to Tibet, he went to parts of China, he went to the Himalayas. He's done a lot. So he knew that if he told this to his brother disciple, they of course wouldn't let him go. So he doesn't tell any of his brother disciple, not even to Swamiji, but he tells that to his father. His father, it seems, when his father was young, his father was eager to take monastic life. And for again, that was not the will of God, So he didn't enter into the monastic life. But that ideal was very strong in his mind. And so Gangadhar knew that his father would be able to appreciate it. So he tells his father, I would like to just go by myself, all alone, depending on no one other than God, deep into the Himalayas. And his father is very happy. His father said, my son, just let me know the day you leave. I myself will come to see you off. So Gangadhar then secretly buys a ticket to maybe Haridwar, I guess, and he lets his father know that this train from Howrah station, I'll be going. Even his Guru Bhais don't know. So he slips out of the Baranagar monastery and comes to Howrah station. And his father, who is already advanced in age by then, he's quite old, father has come to the station. And so before the train is about to move, Gangadhar bows down, touches his father's feet, takes his blessings, and steps into the train. And his father there blesses him. And the train starts moving. And then the thoughts that are going on in this young Gangadhar's mind. And he says to himself that he saw his father, his elderly father, standing there on that platform with tears in his eyes, blessing me. And then Gangadhar says, the thought came to my mind, whose renunciation is greater? He said, here is this, I'm this young man looking for an adventure and depending on no one but God. I have this entire life before me, looking forward to this adventure, and I'm going forth. And here is my elderly father, not thinking of himself at all. I am the sole support of his old age. But rather than worrying that who will now look after me when I grow older, he has come here to bless me, to bless his son, that I will go forth and realize God. And then Gangadhar says, at that stage I realized my father's renunciation is infinitely more than my own. So you see, the spirit of renunciation, it had nothing to do with which ashram of life we are in. So I found this story moving every time I think about it or even talk about it. So the first misconception is that renunciation only for the fourth ashrama and not for the three. Clearly, it doesn't apply. The second misconception is that renunciation means giving up. And of course, when you have to give up things, then it's very painful. Again, wrong. That's not how it is. Renunciation, again, at any stage in life, the act of giving up, the act of letting go is always a joyful thing. Now, if it is painful, then it is not renunciation. You see, it's like this. If something is taken away from me, and if I have to let it go, and if I feel sad or if I feel painful, it means that I value that thing. And if I value that thing, then a thing can be taken away from me physically, but my mind is still attached to it. Then that's not renunciation. So renunciation, in some sense, you could say, is not anything that can be done. Renunciation is something that happens naturally. It's a little bit like when we were little babies and we were playing with little toys or little games for children. And then when we become teenagers, all these little puppets and little games that we played, they just remain in some corner of the house if they are not thrown away by that time. Or maybe your little siblings can play with them. But they get renounced because as teenagers, then we have other toys to play with, other things to worry about. And then as we grow older, so what it means is that at different stages in life, certain things become valuable to us. When we outgrow that stage, then those early things lose their value and they get renounced. So renunciation is not to be seen as something that has to be done. All that we have to do is learn from life, try to acquire that clarity, question everything, and as a result of questioning, as a result of knowing, as a result of growing, as a result of this natural process of maturity, things that at one time seemed valuable, things that at one time seemed precious, may no longer seem precious, or things that we didn't have any consideration for suddenly might appear to be very valuable. That's just how life is. We change, our priorities change, our interests change, uh, and so when things no longer are valuable to us, we let go. They just slip away from themselves. We know in Sri Ramakrishna's life, when he was a pujari at the Kali temple in Dakshineshwar, he didn't say, "Oh, I need to know. I need more time for prayer, and this puja duty is just getting in my way." He didn't say that. He was doing all his duties all as meticulously as possible. So he didn't give up the work. But that a time was reached in his life, a stage was reached in his life when he just his mind was so immersed in thinking of the Divine Mother that he couldn't even do the worship well. He couldn't do any of this thing. Not because he didn't want to, not because he thought that was a waste of time, not because he was lazy, but his mind had reached such a level that these other responsibilities slipped away by themselves. And therefore, renunciation is the most joyful thing. And if there are times in life when we have to give up and it's painful, we have to recognize that the time has not yet come for me to give it up. But when we acquire something higher, when we acquire something better, then that which is lower, that which was no longer precious, will slip away and will be renounced automatically. The third thing is renunciation is sometimes we think I'll have to hate something or dislike something in order to renounce it. And that's not true. Renunciation is not the result of hatred or dislike. In fact, we get attached to something. Normally, we use the word attachment to think in only in terms of you love something, you like something. But attachment can occur even through hatred. You, when you hate someone or something intensely, when you dislike someone or something intensely, my hatred, my dislike attaches me to that thing. I can just say this: a Kamsa. Kamsa was so afraid of Krishna, so much disliked him, so much hated him almost, that all that he could do day and night was just think about Krishna. So sometimes we get attached even through our hatred or dislike. And so renunciation is not a result of hatred or dislike. Renunciation is a result of having a higher vision, getting something higher, getting understanding the value of something which is better, so that when which is no longer good in one's own eyes slips away on its own. Yet another misconception about renunciation is that it is unnatural. Um, Now, what is natural or normal? These are all very subjective things, and normally we tend to think that that which majority of the people do, that's normal, that's natural, and that may be true most of the time, but may not be true all of the time, because what the enlightened people see and what their experience of life is very different from the experience of the rest of us. And the rest of us are in huge majority. So it's possible then to say that the experience of these enlightened ones is 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 not normal. And in fact, we know some of these saints and mystics were considered as mad or insane. We know that Ramakrishna himself was seen as a crazy priest. Not many people understood the amazing visions that he was having. I mean, some people understood, but not many. And so it is natural for people to think that what the majority does is like the normal thing. But we have to recognize that there are things in life, and certainly in spiritual life, that this enlightened minority may be seeing things more clearly. And therefore, um, renunciation is might seem unnatural because of the natural tendency of the human mind to want to accumulate in order to hold. In order to kind of hold is also a result of inner insecurity. Um, the more secure we are, the easier it is to open our hands and to share. But the more insecure we feel, the more, in order to kind of feel a sense of security, we want to hold people and things and hoard them and accumulate them. And because most of the people around us, we see them doing this in one way or the other, we think that that's a normal way to live. On the other hand, when we see some of these high models that we have, the exemplars who have taught us the real way to be truly happy, and then we see that that is really the natural way, in the sense that that is our true nature. And the way we are living now, but it might seem natural for human beings, it's not natural for divine beings. And what Vedanta says is we are really divine. So it's a choice that we have. I can either continue to be a human being with all my blunders and mistakes and stupidities, or I can strive to be a divine being. And I can't be both at the same time. And finally, some people think that renunciation is escapism, is running away from the challenges of life. Now, anyone who has tried to practice tyaga, of letting go in whichever form, knows that it's not for the weak, it's not for the cowards. Only truly strong and courageous people can have that's inner strength to let go. And therefore, its renunciation, therefore, is not painful. It's not a result of hatred. It's not unnatural, and it's not a form of escapism. Um, and I think it's important to eliminate these misconceptions from our life. Only then would we know what it means to truly practice tyaga in our daily life. And as I said, now, when we are very young, we don't recognize how much renunciation, how much sacrifice is involved being a parent. Now, many of you, perhaps, or at least some of you, are already parents yourself now. And when you become a parent yourself, you recognize how often, naturally, you have to let go. Sometimes your own sleep, sometimes the things that you want, if to fulfill the needs of your children. And if we are a little bit reflective and then we say, now I know what it means to sacrifice when I'm doing it for my children. And then we can look back, have I been always aware of how much sacrifice my own parents have done for me? Maybe that time we were too young, too small. We just took it for granted. We just thought this is what every mother is supposed to do. That's what every father is supposed to do. So we oftentimes, through our own experience in life, might then recognize how much tyaga is involved being a father or a mother or a teacher. So at different stages in life, we recognize the importance and the possibilities of practicing tyaga. Even as a youngster, when you're doing it for your little brother or little sister, there are infinite possibilities, infinite chances to practice letting go, to practice sacrifice. Because that's how renunciation and service are so connected. Only with that spirit of renunciation, with that act of service. Service is something very sacred. It's not simply, nowadays there are degrees in social service and people can become social workers, which is good. But it's not simply, it's more than simply being a profession. It's more than simply being a label or being a social worker. Service, seva. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna says, in a lot of times in the worship in the temple, we call it Thakur Seva. So worship, it's a divine offering. So I'll just conclude now with a very short story, uh, highlighting how seva can be, or seva is, something very sacred. So this story is about two brothers. It's an anecdote um, about two brothers. So one of the brothers was married and had a family. The other brother was single. Now they jointly owned a farm, and so on the farm, uh, in two corners of the farm, they had their own homes. So one brother lived with his family there, and the other brother was single, so he lived all alone. Now they had an arrangement that everything that that farm produced, they would share the profits equally. And so after, once the harvest was done, each of them had a small warehouse of their own on the property. And so half the produce was taken to one warehouse, half was taken to the other warehouse. And that's how they lived for many years. Now, after some years, something interesting happened. So this brother who was married, suddenly he would wake up in the middle of the night with the thought that, well, I'm my brother, we both are getting old now, and I have this family to support me when I grow old. My children are growing up, they can take care of me. But my brother, who is all alone, his needs are greater than mine. And so it's not fair that we are dividing all the income, all the produce of the farm equally amongst us. He needs more than me. And so he knew that if he went and suggested that to his brother is not going to agree. So what he did was, in the middle of the night, he got up very secretly, went to his own warehouse, got one sack full of wheat or rice or whatever was the grain they had grown that year, and then quietly in the middle of the night walked to his brother's warehouse and put it there, and thought this is my kind of a secret way of making a fair distribution, because my brother needs more, he's living all by himself. Now it so happened that the brother who was single, he started getting these nightly attacks as well. So he would get up in the middle of the night, and then he would say to himself that this is an unfair arrangement. He said that, well, my brother has a family to look after. There are a lot more mouths to be fed in his home. I'm just alone. I don't need so much. So his needs are more. So this brother who was single then would get up in the middle of the night, take one sack full from his warehouse, and then go quietly and put it in that married brother's warehouse. And so it just kind of went on this way for quite some time, until one night it just so happened they both got up at the same time, and neither of them really knew what the other one's doing. So, but one night they got up at the same time, and each of them had picked up with that sack full on the back, and they were coming, and then they met midway between their two homes. And then this story then gradually became, afterward the brothers passed away and many years passed. But this time the story had become well known in that town where this farm was. Years later, when people in that town wanted to build a temple, they wanted to build a temple in that town, and they said, which is the most sacred spot where they could build that temple? And then they said, that spot where these two brothers met while carrying that sacks in the middle of the night, that is the most sacred spot in that village. And that's where we are going to build the temple. You see, that is what seva is. That is what service is. When these brothers at that point had reached a stage, they were not thinking about their own selves at all. It was about the need of the other person. Now, that is the true spirit of service. Whenever in life we do anything for anybody. Now, service doesn't necessarily mean going out and just helping strangers. Service can be done to people you live with. Service can be done to your members of your family. So, but every time you do something for someone without thinking of your own little self, without thinking about what am I going to get out of it. So with no self-interest involved, even if you pick up a little thing and give it to somebody, that is service. And so if any service acts of service create pain in the heart, or sometimes you have these service group service activity, and then sometimes a lot of these service groups, seva samitis as sometimes we call them, they start with great ideals and good intentions, but a lot of times we see over time then politics enters into it. People start fighting with each other, finding faults with each other. They break up into form into different groups. There's something wrong with that service. Although this should not have been the outcome of that. So service is something very sacred, very holy. And that true service can come only with a genuine spirit of renunciation. And that is what Swamiji meant when he said that these are the national ideals of India. If we want to be true patriots, if we want to say truly I'm proud to be an Indian, then it's not simply enough to just carry our national flag and say Jana Gana Mana. That's important. Those are important symbols. But how much of Tyaga, how much of Seva, these national ideals, how much of these ideals have become a part of my being? That is the kind of question we need to ask ourselves. And the more we are established in these ideals, it really doesn't matter which stage of life we are in. It's totally immaterial. If that spirit of Tyaga and Seva animates my heart, I'm closer to God. I will realize God. I will experience the freedom, the joy, the perfection that we all need. Everything will come to us. We don't even have to worry about which ashrama or which what. Just have to remove that little ego from within. Then we will be Indians in true sense of the term. So these are some of the thoughts I wanted to share with you, and I'm very happy that I got a chance to do that today. So if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, I'll be happy to answer them if I can.
Thank you, Swamiji. I will conduct the questions now. The first question is from Arpita, who asks, if renunciation is not something that can be done, but something that happens, then what can we do to facilitate renunciation happening?
All that we need to do is to keep our eyes and mind open. Because with a closed mind, with the closed eyes, we won't learn anything in life. So if I keep my mind and eyes open, look around, go through life, carrying out your duties and responsibilities as best you can. And as we learn, our priorities will start shifting. Things which at one time seemed important may not seem as important. Something that I have ignored suddenly might say, oh, I shouldn't have ignored that. And so as these priorities keep changing, that which is less important, less precious, will automatically get renounced. So renunciation is something that will automatically happen if I learn from life and keep on growing.
I was thinking actually of what Christ says, never let your right hand see what your left hand is doing, when you spoke of the story of the two brothers meeting.
Yeah.
So next question is from Namrata, who says, Pranam Swamiji, thank you for this wonderful talk. My question is, Swamiji, Vivekananda says, quote, feel my children, feel for the poor, how to make this feeling stronger and more lasting.
Again, feeling is something that cannot be artificially generated. And so again, I just go back to what I said before. All that we need to do is to be mindful, to be awake, to be vigilant. A lot of our life is lived mechanically, because we will see that once our life kind of gets into a routine, then every day we are not like doing everything new. Some of those things are we just just we just keep on doing things day after day after day. And then when life becomes mechanical, we stop learning, we stop seeing, we stop understanding. So can we begin? It's a little bit like when you go to a new city for the first time. You've never been to that place before, and then of course every time you go to say, oh, this building, and you're seeing things, because a lot of time you're seeing them for the first time. But then when you have lived in a place for like years and years and years, and then you go out for a walk, you stop looking because, oh, malum hai, I know this, there's nothing to see. But can I wake up every morning and think, this is a new day. This everything that I'm seeing today, I'm seeing it for the first time. And this is so true, not just with regard to just buildings and things, even to the people we live with. You see, when you make a new friend, you're eager to know about that friend. But then you're living with your family, you're seeing your parents or your children or your family so often, we just take them for granted. We just think, oh, I know, well, this is my mother, my father, my children, I know them. No, maybe I don't know them, because I maybe I know a little bit about them, but then afterwards I just stop seeing. But every time, and this might sound strange, but actually it's very helpful. Even when you meet people whom you have known for a long time, be in their presence thinking as if you are meeting a new person, as if you're seeing them for the first time. And you will see that even people whom you have known for years, you suddenly will then become mindful. You might notice something you may not have noticed before. You see, we think we are smart. We are not really as smart. We human beings, we have to be like humble. We're not really as smart as we think we are. Because sometimes people say, oh, I've fallen in love, and say, oh, I know this person. We are like, like, yeah, I know this person, we think. And then sometimes when you get to know a person, and then within 6 months or 8 months, suddenly you start seeing, say, oh my God, I can't believe you did this, or I can't believe you're thinking like that. And then what happened? I thought I knew this person totally well. So, we really don't know everyone in every possible way. And so just keeping our eyes open will be helpful. And then that is the way to go forward, I think. Yeah.
Arpita says, thank you so much, Maharaj. Tanushree question is next. She says, Pranam Maharaji, my question is, it is the I and the ego that always come in the path of service. How can we do away with it?
Wow, that's $1 million question. If you can do away with it, you're already an enlightened being. You will be a Buddha. You will be a Jivan Mukta. So, from a purely utilitarian standpoint, we could say that every time the I is very strong, I experience more pain and suffering in life. That is just the way things are. You will find that the best moments of your life are the moments when you have forgotten your I. I mean, even suppose you are interested in music and you are listening to some great concert being played. And sometimes when you kind of immerse yourself into music, at that point, you are not thinking of the I anymore. And then that you just feel uplifted by that music. Or you're reading some book, or you're reading one of the things that happens with Swami Vivekananda's books is they're so charged, so powerful, so inspiring. So as long as you're reading it, your little ego somehow has kind of gone to sleep, as it were. And then you enjoy that reading so much. A lot of times people just read Vivekananda just for that inspiration. Later on, if you ask them, like, what did you read? They may not be able to say what they read, but they just felt uplifted. Now, but I think Swamiji's books should be read more than not simply like a vitamin pill that you put and say, get charged up again, and then next day you're ready for getting charging up again. I think it's more than inspiration. We also need education, kind of need to bring some kind of a permanent transformation within us. But uh, say that question again. I think got drifted. What was it?
Oh, certainly. The question is, the I and the ego always come in the path
Yes.
of service. How can we do away with it?
Yes. So we know from our experience in life that when this I and ego kind of gets out of the way, and especially when we are engaged in some activity so dear to our heart, then the I gets out of the way. The I is completely out of the way when we are fast asleep, when you're not even dreaming. And that state of sushupti, that deep sleep, is always wonderful. I mean, dreams may not always be wonderful. Sometimes people get nightmares. So the experience in a waking state can be painful because the I is pretty strong. The I is also present in dreams. So dreams can be sometimes be ups and downs. But that deep sleep, when you're not even dreaming, when the I is absent, then it's very painful. Very joyful. And so even from a purely utilitarian standpoint, we know that I gets out of the way, I can be happy. And we all want to be happy. So one way of removing that I is what Sri Ramakrishna said, is kind of ripening that I. He used the two phrases in Bengali, is like kacha ami and paka ami. Kacha mein or paka hua mein, in some way, in Hindi, if you want to say that. So all of the I that is somehow associated with these kind of petty things of life. I'm a very intellectual, I'm very handsome, I'm very beautiful, I am this, I am very wealthy. This I can bring a lot of pain and suffering in one way or the other. But if my I can be associated, can be attached to something beyond me, attached to God in some ways, the I'm a child of God, I'm a servant of God, or I'm a child of Holy Mother, or I am the Atman. So there is an I there clearly. I'm a child of God, that there is an I there. But if that I is connected with the divine in some form or in some way, that I, instead of bringing pain, in fact, can free me. So the first thing we can do is to find, where is my I attached to? And clearly, the I is never attached to one thing. It just kind of keeps on shifting. Throughout the day, I attaches and detaches itself from 1,000 things. But you will see that some of the things, the I will remain fairly constant. So that would be the dominant identity that I have. And so when people who are in politics, and if they may be attached to one political party or the other, so they might primarily think of themselves as, I belong to this party or that party. No matter what they are doing in life, that would be uppermost in their mind. So then that would be their dominant I. So we have to look in our heart and say, why, which is my dominant I? If I'm interested in cricket, then I would be thinking like my team and so on. So that would be my dominant I. But if I like to think of myself as spiritual, if I like to see myself as a devotee, then my dominant I should be I connected in some way with my spiritual ideal. And so that would be a way to free myself from this pain-giving results of this worldly I.
Thank you. Next question is from Alka, who asks, the question itself is from Rajdeep Barai. Pranam Maharaj, could you please explain the mechanism of karma yoga leading to chitta shuddhi?
Oh, then yeah, the mechanism will take some time, but I would recommend that you please read Swami Vivekananda's book Karma Yoga, and it'll give you a very good idea. And I had a chance some time back to work on a kind of a commentary on Karma Yoga, because one of the questions that came to my mind was, when Swamiji gave these talks, which are like what he called as the textbooks for spiritual life, the four yogas, the Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Raja Yoga. So what we have are amazing transcripts of the class talks that he gave, but we don't have any record, because clearly, I mean, just like now we had this talk, and now we have these question answers, and now because of technology, we are able to tape it and preserve it and so on. But in Swamiji's time, there was no taping, there was no nothing. And so after Swamiji gave these talks, clearly there must have been periods of question answers. Clearly, there were people who must have gone to Swamiji and said, I would like to practice Karma Yoga. We have no record whatsoever of what Swamiji told them of how I can practice Karma Yoga. So if I read Swamiji's Karma Yoga and feel like charged by it, and if I want to be a Karma Yogi, what are the kind of steps I need to take? What do I really need to do beginning tomorrow in order to start the practice of Karma Yoga? So we don't have this kind of, that's something that every reader is expected to do on their own. And many of us just, don't know how to do it. So one of the questions that I was trying to figure out some years ago was that if I'm inspired by Swamiji's Karma Yoga and want to practice it, what do I really need to do to start the practice? Is there a way to chart out a possible practice? Now, we don't know what Swamiji himself told people during his time, and there is no record, so we can at least make an attempt. And that's what I tried to do. So if you can take a look at that book called Walking the Walk, a manual of Karma Yoga, that might also help in explaining the mechanism of how Karma Yoga leads to Chitta Shuddhi, a purity of heart.
Thank you. Next question is from Sri Lekha, who asks, Will it help to imbibe the renunciation as part of value education in true sense in our present day education?
Oh, sure, of course it will help. But I think I would like to caution a little bit, because sometimes we include these things. We have a kind of a set of a syllabus for value education, and then a certain number of ideas are given. But someone attending a course like that, there has to be some way, and I don't know what that way is, of somehow making sure that the ideas that are given and are shared don't simply remain at the cerebral level, that somehow they descend down and actually change us in some way, that we are able to practice it in our day-to-day life. And so it's good that the lot of these value education programs are being conducted in many parts in India. As I read in some of the reports that come in. I really don't know how to do this, but is there some way to assess how those values are entering into our heart and changing us as human beings? Because sometimes we might discover that we are all very eloquent talking about these things. I spoke a lot about renunciation and service, and we read Swamiji, and it's very inspiring ideas. But the worth of these ideas is not just simply that we are able to sit together and discuss and be very eloquently talk about it, but actually live it. As Swamiji said, an ounce of practice is worth tons of theory. And so we need to find a way to put these into practice also.
Yes, I was thinking of, when he says realize religion, no talking will do. And
Yeah.
well, that brings me to my question, actually. I don't think there are other questions in the chat box. But what I wanted to ask you, so I'm actually a graduate student here at the University of Pennsylvania, and I've taught in some universities in the Philadelphia area, and I just wanted to know, having served at Harvard and MIT and American universities, as we don't see Brahmacharya and renunciation, which you spoke about at the beginning of your talk, as social ideals of education, whether in high school or the university, as it's organized around, at least in my experience, around courtship and sports and all of these things which are unique to, I suppose, this civilization. And but sometimes it can lead, I've noticed in students, to a kind of hedonism, which is part of the university culture, ironically, and not as a judgment, but myself having been embroiled in it, in my own ways. So I suppose the question is, what are your thoughts on the present state of the university in the US, and what is the role of Indian students and teachers in awakening a genuine spirit of the first ashrama? And how can is renunciation possible at a organizational and national level here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is possible, but it could be difficult. And actually, not so much in here. I mean, pretty much, I think, even in India also at present to a large extent, especially in big cities in India. The one of the challenges I think kind of any immigrant community has, I mean, for people of Indian origin who are in the United States, for instance, there is a peer pressure, and there is this pressure to kind of fit in, pressure to not do something very different from what other people are doing. The pressure to kind of feel one with the environment in which we are. And so that pressure is definitely there. And I recognize the difficulties involved, but I do think that if someone is determined to live according to these principles, it's possible to do it without feeling like an oddball in a university campus. I mean, it's possible to, this is not to say one cannot go for parties and mix with your friends. But then if one can have one's own boundaries, like I can go this far and not beyond. And there may be therefore some situations when a person might seem like, well, you may not participate in everything that your friends are doing. And to that extent, you might not feel a part of the pack. To that extent, you might feel a bit excluded. So that's the bargain one has to make. If I'm willing to feel somewhat excluded for some of my principles, in return for having that joy of holding on to these principles, or I let go of this joy of having principles and then just feel accepted fully by my friends. And everyone has to make their own judgment about this particular transactional possibilities possible for us. So it's difficult. I accept that in an increasingly secularized environment in our universities, it's not easy. But life is not easy either. I mean, life is tough. There is that book called The Road Less Traveled by, I think, Scott Peck. You might have heard about this book, which it begins by saying life is tough. And the inner resistance from us to accept that idea that life is tough, which makes it even tougher. The moment we kind of accept, yes, life is tough. The moment we accept that, then we discover that life is not really as tough as we thought.
But I think it also goes back to that very important point you made at the beginning, which is that you can be moral without being religious, but not religious without being moral, because even if in a secular system, educational system, it's morality ultimately is the goal, because hypocrisy can exist even within a religious situation. But thank you so much, Maharaj. I will hand over the mic to Alka now, who is going to conclude, and we have a closing prayer.
Okay, thank you.
Pranam.
Namaskar. Namaskar.
Alka?
Don't know if our connection is stable. So let me go ahead with the vote of thanks. On behalf of VSC JNU, I extend my gratitude to our speaker, Revered Swami Tyagananda ji, for enlightening us. We are deeply thankful to him for taking out time to deliver this wonderful talk, and I'm sure everybody has benefited immensely from his insights, which he put so simply, yet they are so profound. I'm thankful to all the members of VSC JNU, Amrita, Tanushri, Arun, Anindita Didi, Divya, Namrata, Srilekha for their constant inputs and suggestions. I extend my special thanks to Divya for conducting the talk, Swagata Di for poster design, Prachi for chanting the Shanti Mantra, and Alka for hosting the meeting. Their constant hard work has turned this day into a success. I would like to especially thank Sri Anirban Chakravarti, who has served as the foundation for the entire event and for taking hold of the technical team. His calm approach, continuous guidance, and silent work is a great catalyst for bringing this event to a success. Thank you, everyone, for joining and listening to us and for your contribution to the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now we would like to conclude with the Shanti Mantra. Prachi?
Yeah. Thank you, Didi. ॐ सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः May all be prosperous and happy. May all be free from illness. May all see what is spiritually uplifting. May no one suffer. Om, peace, peace, peace. Thank you.